is the Conrad Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
Food for 5 years. 1,000 gallons of gas. Air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Telegram, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I'm Toolman Tim, and today is January the 22nd, 2023, and this is episode 241 of the Workshop Podcast. In just a minute, we're going to have Mr. Ryan Buford on. We'll get the announcements out of the way, and then we're going to have a great conversation. But real quick, we got the Groundhog Day giveaway coming up. Of course, that's going to be February 2nd. We're going to launch that. That seems to be a yearly thing for us. I'm not sure how I ever started with a Groundhog Day giveaway, but we're stuck with it now. So number two, hey, we got RZ over on Twitch, One Step Closer in YouTube. Good to have you. If you're thinking about signing up for Patch of the Month, remember, we still have promo code Mitch, just because he likes to shit on the things that are good for all of us. I figured we'd use his name as the promo code. So if you go by patchofthemonth.co and click that link, you'll get 2 free patches included, because that's what we do. And finally, so this is not a sponsor yet. This is not an endorsement yet. But if you guys are ever looking at picking up an EMP shield, we now have a promo code. So I'm going to be getting a demo unit here soon. I'm going to be able to test it out. We're going to do some reviews on it. And I really hope that it's something that's going to work for everybody. But if you're looking at buying one, there's a link in the description today. You'll save $50 on it. So I'm kind of excited. It was nice of them to provide that to the community. And with that, let's bring on Mr. Buford. How are you, Ryan?
Great. How we doing?
Good. Did you know you're now in the Guinness Book of World Records? Well, maybe not the Guinness Book, but you are you now have the record for having the most appearances on the Workshop Podcast.
Hey, that's awesome. I'll take it.
So you're at 4. Carrie Brown right behind you with 3. So
nice.
So for those who don't remember, you were way back January 30th of last year. So that's like basically a year ago. Episode 64. We started with USB survival devices. Then we did post-apocalyptic salvage in episode 91. And then we did currencies of the apocalypse in 182. So we've had a lot of fun along the way.
Yeah, we're all over the map, aren't we?
That's all right. But we finally got to meet up in real life in North Carolina. And So what are we drinking tonight?
This is red wine out of the keg.
Nice. I stayed away from the bourbon tonight. I just got Diet Pepsi with me. Yeah. So
that's all right.
So
sometimes you gotta take a break.
Absolutely. So for those who don't remember or haven't been here from, they've joined. Who are you? Where are you from? What are you up to?
Yeah, so my name's Ryan Buford. I have a podcast with my son, Colin, over at Prepper Broadcasting called The Next Generation Show. We talk mostly about some of the stuff that your kids don't tend to learn in school. And it was really kind of the brainchild of me moving out into the homestead arena, taking my prepping skills to the next level and really trying to show him how to do stuff, how to survive, how to make things work, how to fix things and keep things running and stuff like that. And it just kind of developed into this, this relationship, this podcast, this story, whatever you want to call it. And it's been an amazing journey. Now he's almost out of the house as a grown, full-fledged adult. So I kind of, it was kind of a secret mission to teach him these things without letting him know that he was learning these things, kind of. And it has been a wild success and a wild ride, and it's been a lot of fun. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I live in Eastern Washington, United States, and Washington State. And, I'm just kind of, I'm all over the place. I do podcasts, and I've been to Prepper Camp as a presenter for 2 years now, and I think I'll be going back again next year.
Yeah, so you guys got to know that, he's kind of downplaying it, but Colin, his son, has turned out to be a fine young man. Matter of fact, he actually, what is he, 17? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys know many 17-year-olds who will do this, but he got up on stage and presented on small engine maintenance at Prepper Camp 3 times in a row. So you got to be pretty damn proud about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Kind of threw him to the wolves on that one. But he did well, and it was a good experience. And I think really that's kind of what it's all about, is, learning that experience, doing the stuff, putting your money where your mouth is, if you want to call it that, or just, putting your feet to the fire, whatever the term is. You just kind of have to get out there and do these things. If you're going to call yourself a prepper, survivalist, homesteader, or whatever, you have to do the things. Your whole Toolman workshop type stuff. I mean, that's a prime example, because I mean, the way you've evolved your podcast and your presence and stuff like that, it's pretty amazing, to kind of see how that works. And if you were to be like, oh, well, I just do this for the money, or I do this for whatever, because it's just rolling in, you get into this kind of stuff, and you realize who the people who really do this stuff are, and who the people who, do it for clicks, or do it for Amazon reviews, or do it for whatever, because they're doing something that is outside of who we are. So I just try and keep it as real as possible and force them to do things.
What episode are you guys on now? Do you know?
We just crested 200 episodes a couple weeks ago, so that was pretty cool. And he's been there for almost all of them. There's been a couple of them where he couldn't make it because of schoolwork, or prom, or little things like that. But for the most part, I kind of gave him the choice when we first started, because I was like, hey, do you want to do this with me? And he was kind of like, yeah, sure. And he's stuck it out through the whole works. It's been really pretty amazing.
That's cool. It's a lot better than I remember when I got my first, working as a paper boy, and I stuck with that for all of about 3 months until mom and dad had to do it. So he did really well. I'm proud of him. It was nice to meet him in person.
Yeah. Well, and those are kind of, that in itself is something that, like I said, they don't teach that in school,
No.
Sticking through something, seeing it to the end.
It's worth a lot, man. So I got it so we're going to talk about alternative fuels tonight, guys, which I know you all turned in to check out, but I got to pick your brain first, Ryan. Any new USB gadgets? Because that seems to be our thing. Have you, anything? Well, first off, how have you been playing with the water filter a bit? And have you?
I have, and actually I reached out to them because I'm going to get the one that goes to the Nalgene bottle.
Yep.
I carry a Nalgene bottle with me to work every day, and I'm kind of developing a camp system with 3 Nalgene bottles, one with food, one with filtration, and then one with tools, equipment, or whatever, or maybe even a tent. I'm trying to see how that's going to work. But I mean, with the idea being that I have 3 things that can work together and function as a supply cache, and use it also for cooking and water filtration, and have it all very condensed into something about the size of a lunchbox,
Nice.
So as far as the USB stuff goes, I haven't found anything really thrilling since our last podcast, but I'm toying around with the idea of vape pen technology to see if there's something that can be done with those, because they get super hot if you leave them on too long, but they also can be used to vaporize oils, which is something that we could even take into what we're talking about today with the concept of alternative fuel sources. Because if you had a battery source that could vaporize oil, then you take that oil and if you can ignite the vapors, then you have a source of combustion. So there's a potential there for kind of like a hybrid battery or electrical charge source, that could be used to generate a more powerful tool, like something like a generator or something like that. So it'd be like a 12-volt battery that you could plug in this vaporizer into, with a cylinder of oil that is flammable, when in vapor form that could be pumped into a carburetor for a generator or something like that.
That's far out, man.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of out there, and I haven't had an opportunity to really dig into it, but it's something that I'm tinkering with.
That's one thing. I don't know. I've always said like every time we talk, I enjoy our conversations because you always stretch my brain and you always have something new you're working on, or 18 different things kind of running around up there with little projects that you're thinking about, and it always stretches my brain. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
So over the years, I say that it's been almost 2 years since I launched a podcast, but soon after you were on your first time, I had a gentleman on who spent quite a bit of time talking about wood gasifiers, which was pretty cool because I knew less than zero about that back then.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I was at prepper camp, I met a gentleman at Tactical Response who was getting ready to run his old truck on straight canola oil. So he was a local farmer. So this kind of stuff's always intrigued me. So what have you, of course, I'll pick your brain on this, but what have been some of your either projects that you've been working on or projects you're looking to work on? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, honestly, it's all of the above. I recently got turned on with gasifiers on social media. Actually, there's a guy who was building one, and we got to talking, and I was just really interested in the concept and how it works. And for me, I was equally interested in the idea that the United States government put out plans for civilians to be able to make their own back in 1984 or something like that, 1982.
Okay.
And it came through FEMA, and it evolved as the oil crisis started to emerge from the 80s, and a lot of people who in their 30s and younger don't realize what happened in the 80s. And anybody who grew up in the 80s as a child may not really fully understand, but you would feel, what your parents were experiencing. But anybody who actually went through the 80s and the 70s as a teenager or an adult, how stretched things can get when it comes to fuel. Lately, we've only just barely crested the surface of that. I mean, when we were seeing fuel prices up in the $4, $5, $6 a gallon range, that's nothing compared to what they were seeing in the 70s and 80s because of the oil embargoes and stuff like that. So FEMA put out this document, and I'll drop it into the chat room if I can track it down. It's there's a website out there called buildagasifier.com. They have some amazing resources, but let me see if I can find it. Give me just 1 second.
So the gentleman that I had on the show a while back, he was awesome, like great guy, but his thing was, it was like full kit, and it was high end, like all machined parts, and it was great. I loved it. But I've also been, ever since I had him on, I've wanted to find someone else who could talk a little more on the DIY end of things, because they're great, but not everybody can spend that kind of money on them, right?
No. And if you look at, I dropped a link to the FEMA gasifier plans into the private chat, so you can share that with the group and anybody out. So what's weird is so I'm going to talk kind of fast, so let me know if I cut out. Up until 2001, the United States had what was called the Civil Defense Department.
Yes.
Civil Defense Department was basically designed in response to the potential for a nuclear strike back in World War I, II era. And it was a funded department. The sole responsibility was outreach and trying to get people to be prepared in a much greater way. Like, this is how you need to build your own fallout shelter. This is how you need to maintain your own food supply, all this kind of stuff, with the intention of making sure that the United States citizens were capable of handling themselves. In the United States, you will sometimes see buildings that are marked as fallout shelters, but ever since 2001, those fallout shelter signs have been removed. And the reason is because the only agency capable of certifying a fallout shelter as being effective as a fallout shelter was a civil defense department.
Oh.
What happened in 2001?
I think there was some sort of attack or something, wasn't there?
Yeah, September 11th, 2001 changed pretty much everything. And when that happened, there was a change in government funding to fund Homeland Security.
Right.
The Civil Defense Department was deleted, and instead, all of their funding and their kind of duties sort of went to FEMA. The problem with that is FEMA has their own fish to fry. They've got to deal with major emergencies and stuff like that. So, that all this to say that, okay, back in the 80s, we had fuel crisis. FEMA came out with a document that was basically a funded research project that was kind of like Apollo 13. I don't know if you ever see that movie.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a scene in that movie where they one of the astronauts who could not go to space had to be held back, and they were like, look, we got an oxygen problem on the shuttle, and we have to get it fixed. This is what we have to work with. And so they had to figure out how to get the carbon dioxide that they were breathing out filtered in such a way that they could breathe oxygen and not suffocate, basically, before they got back to Earth. It kind of spurred a level of ingenuity to where they had to figure it out how to make it work. Well, that's kind of what happened in this regard. So the document that I dropped into the private chat is essentially a FEMA funded paper that outlines how an average citizen can create their own gasifier using stuff that you have around the house. The majority of the tools that are required are a couple of metal garbage cans, like a paint can, a drill, and like a mixing bowl, a metal mixing bowl.
Really?
And then, yeah, just some exhaust tubing, and that's about it. So it's down to its bare bones parts. And it's really interesting to me that at this stage in the game, when we're having fuel crisis after fuel crisis, from gasoline to diesel to natural gas to propane, all these different furnace oil, all these things wind up just all of a sudden becoming sold or unavailable or prices through the roof. And there are no alternative solutions coming in place to kind of help the average citizen, help people get by to ease the burden. Well, in the 80s, they were kind of like, look, we got to figure something out. But now none of that's happening. And I think when you look at it, to me, it makes sense for us to pay attention to these alternative fuel sources, because up until about 8-10 months ago, I knew what a gasifier was or was capable of, but I never really understood how it worked or thought that I could ever build one. So that's kind of where I'm going with this, is really to try and develop or make one of my own, essentially, so I can take and just so folks know what a gasifier is, because I kind of been dropping this out there. You can take wood chips or wood particulates, stuff like that. You could use sawdust or whatever. Generally, you want wood chips, pellets, things like that. You put it in a hopper on the top, usually, and you ignite a small portion in the bottom, and then you seal it shut and pump it full of air. What that does is it creates char, and then that char burns. There's like a chemical reaction that happens, and instead of producing a bunch of flames and heat, while it does produce heat, the excess heat kind of speeds up the reaction, and then you wind up pulling out flammable vapors, and those flammable vapors then get filtered to remove water and contaminants and tar, stuff like that, leftovers. And then what you wind up with is a clean vapor at the end that can be basically pumped right into a carburetor.
It's like they have like 2 reburn chambers or something, right? Or basically they continue to, or they burn, or is it more filters? I can't. Yeah.
The filters. So there's basically a big canister. Inside this canister is a smaller canister. And then you usually pump air into it, and then you just push air, like compressed air or whatever, to really, heat it up and get the coals going. And then the air going in turns into flammable vapors that get pressurized out. Those flammable vapors go through a series of filter, and there's different kinds, whether you do it vertical or up or down or whatever. But those flammable vapors wind up going through a filter system to remove, like I said, water and tar, because those things will destroy the component that you're trying to run.
Sure.
But if you go through the right filter process, you put those, you can connect it directly to a carbureted vehicle or something like that, and it can run that vehicle, or you can actually collect those flammable vapors. And this is what's weird to me is this isn't new technology. I was like, oh wow, this is something that in the 80s they came up with. Well, the reality is a little bit different. I'm going to drop a picture into chat. I don't know if you can share a picture on your screen.
Let's see. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll you know what? Give me a sec. You keep going here, and I can share the picture.
So gasifiers have been around since the 40s. They were developed during World War II, and it was kind of essentially the same thing, because they're like, look, we need gasoline, we need diesel to be able to run our planes, to be able to run our tanks, to be able to run our equipment, trucks and vehicles. So you folks back in the mainland are going to have to figure something else out. Well, this is what came about. These gasifiers were able to basically run a vehicle. So what you see in this photo is a bag. And that bag is basically like a balloon that's filled with flammable vapors. Those flammable vapors extend down through that tube into the intake of the combustion chamber for that vehicle. And then as the cylinders draw in air for the power stroke, they wind up getting the spark that they normally would, and they run like a gas engine.
Oh, okay. That was the thing I was wondering about, because here, gas tends to be lighter than air, right? Of course, because it's floating. So it creates a suction or a vacuum with the movement of the valves or the cylinders. Is that right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's crazy.
And this is what really kind of got me going on this whole rabbit trail, was because as you look into alternative fuel sources, you kind of have to get the concept of a liquid fuel out of your head and realize that fuels in a vapor form are where it's at, basically. When you look at a carburetor, are you very familiar with carburation?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. But go ahead and explain it though, because
Yeah. So I have a 1984 Ford Ranger with a V6 2.8 liter engine that's carbureted. It's one of the last models that they made with a carburetor, and they had a bunch of electronic crap on it for emissions and stuff like that. But I've converted that. Well, I'll get to that part in a second. But essentially, the way a carburetor works is you will have liquid fuel that enters a bowl, like a toilet bowl. And as you step on the pedal, it draws liquid fuel out into a mist, and it gets sucked down into the intake. Hopefully I didn't lose you.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. And then once it gets mixed with the heat, those little droplets turn into even finer droplets, vapors that get sucked in to the chamber, whichever piston is drawing those vapors in. And in the process of doing that, the vapors inside the cylinder create an environment that is ideal for an explosion. So the vapors, and like someone said in chat here, hydrogen bomb anyone? That's exactly right. I mean, we're creating hydrogen bombs thousands of times a second whenever you're driving down the road. The only difference is that it's not hydrogen, it's gas vapor, gasoline or diesel. Not, yeah, sort of. So it's kind of like you're taking that liquid step, the liquid form of gasoline, and you are bypassing that completely. You're going straight to the vapor form and pumping vapor into the combustion chamber.
Which means that you don't need a carburetor, or you bypass the carburetor, which means, or kind of.
Yeah. So, for example, I'll kind of get to what I was starting to mention earlier. I have converted my Ford Ranger to have dual fuel. So it runs off of gasoline, but it also runs off of propane. So propane is a similar form of fuel to where it is, it's a liquid at -40 or something like that. But as soon as you start gaining in temperature, it starts to vaporize. And when you turn on your propane tank to your gas stove, you don't see liquid come out, you see vapor. Well, you don't even see vapor, but you can hear the vapor coming, because as that vapor pressure builds in the cylinder, you crack that cylinder, and then the vapor gets released off of the top. That's what burns. So, and they have additives in there so that you can smell it, right? So you can tell when there's propane leaking or whatever. Essentially, my conversion, instead of drawing fuel from a float bowl, it draws propane in through the air filter, sort of. It how do I say this? It draws air in through the air plenum and directly down the top of the carburetor.
Sure.
So it, instead of going through the gas, what do you call them? The fuel air mixture, it goes in through the top, but there is still an air mixture associated with it. So you can't just pump straight propane in your gasoline. It'll choke it out just like gasoline would. So you still have to have a fuel to air ratio that works. And if the carburetor is tuned properly to gasoline, it will also run on propane. And for people who might have a hard time understanding the effectiveness of this, just think of a forklift.
Right.
Forklifts run off of propane all the time. Some other forms of heavy equipment do, bobcats, small skid steers, things like that. If you think of it in the same terms, you basically add a propane tank, one or two components to the top of the vehicle, and then next thing you know, you can pump that fuel right into the combustion chambers and run off of that. Now, mine, I actually have it set up to where if things went really bad, I could go grab my neighbor's 5-gallon propane tank, pay for it or exchange it or whatever, plug it into my connector on the back of my truck, and I could drive. So, and one of the things about propane is that it'll last for 25 years underground.
Right.
Or above ground in a tank. So you could essentially have your own liquid fuel storage system at your home, and then pump it into your own 5 to 8 gallon or 10-gallon tanks that you use to drive away with. So when the propane prices are reasonable, this is a feasible alternative to normal gasoline. Plus, it lasts longer. So, I mean, and you can use it for other stuff. You could just be like, oh, I run my furnace off of propane, or I run my barbecues off of it, but I also run my car off of it. So when you're out of gasoline at the pump, you can actually keep moving.
That's great. Yeah, I never thought about. I've thought a lot of things, like as far as here it is. One Step Closer says fuel arbitrage, so, and that's exactly it. Because I've thought of propane as infinitely storable, but I never thought about playing the market with the prices so that you could save quite a bit that way too. That's really good.
Yeah, and it's something. I mean, you obviously have to do it when the prices are good, but I mean, right now, in some cases, propane is too expensive to. It's on par with gasoline, which to me doesn't make sense. Yeah. But with that in mind, if you're gonna, like, I've kind of done the math, and it's like, well, if I burn through this many miles per week or whatever, and I go through this many dollars for gas, if I basically, when I go buy a tank of gas, I set aside enough for propane, I could buy a year's supply of propane at a time. Pay $5,000 or something like that to fill a tank. And then, as the fuel prices skyrocket, I'm still on an even keel. So it's really kind of, and exactly like Clark mentions here, you really avoid the fuel taxes on gasoline. So
that's cool.
Plus, if you buy in bulk, you can do that. And there's no restrictions against putting propane storage tanks on your property. You put a gasoline storage tank on your property, guess who's going to come knocking?
Yeah, pretty much everybody. And heaven help you if it ever leaks, because you're never selling your property after that.
Yep.
I got a few questions here, just real quick. We'll work through and then keep going. But Clark says, is it illegal in U.S. states to burn homemade fuels in road vehicles. It's illegal in Canada because of fuel taxation. I'm going to guess it probably is. Have you looked into that at all?
It's only illegal if you get caught.
Right. Just like burning dyed fuel.
Right, exactly. Now, in dyed fuel, it'll usually have a different odor to it too. I mean, if you get pulled over, they're going to know. But I will say that in the United States, we have some laws and regulations when it comes to certain things like alcohol. You can make like 500 gallons of alcohol per year or something like that.
Right.
The same applies to diesel. So, and I'll go ahead and start on this little tangent too.
Mhm.
Well, I won't, because if we have more questions, but I will let you know. So like with diesel fuel, you can actually make your own diesel, store your own diesel, and use your own diesel if you have the ability to do so. But you there's nothing saying that you have to report it. There's nothing saying that you have to, abide by that or whatever, or like you don't have to pay the county taxes or whatever. You have to source your own raw materials. So your methanol, your oil, your titrations, and all that kind of stuff. So diesel fuel is a whole nother one. And I've actually got some links for the folks who are interested in that, because there's a guy out of Utah who has an entire, and if you guys are in Canada, do it. Learn how to do this. Even if you can't do it legally, to like have it on hand, learn the process, if nothing else. And then that way you can have materials and supplies and the knowledge upstairs to know what you need to make your own. And I'll do that when you're ready to move on to it.
Sure. So that's a DIY diesel. That's the idea.
Yep.
Okay. Do you know about EPA regulating DIY fuels? I'm wondering. I guess we kind of touched on that a little bit.
I think this would fall in line with the same thing with alcohol. So yeah, I can make 500 gallons of alcohol a year to my own household or to my own name. But the second I sell it,
right,
that's when the ATF is going to come down to my house. I would imagine that when it comes to DIY fuels, it'll be the same concept. If I am making my own fuel for my own use, then that's usually okay. But if I'm using it to turn a profit, at that point, then the taxes are going to come into play, the regulations going to come into play, and then I'm going to have like production facility type things, and it'll be out of the, out beyond that. In the United States, it's kind of a weird and kind of a good thing, really, that if you're doing something in your own home, then it's okay, because you own the responsibility of that. If you die making diesel fuel, oh well, sorry for your bad luck. But if you are attempting to turn a profit for it, all of a sudden the 3-letter agencies show up. So
right, then you become a moonshiner or some other. Yeah, exactly. Haas wants to know, do you know about making homemade kerosene?
So kerosene is actually a byproduct of diesel. And it's funny that they mentioned that. So kerosene and gasoline, they're kind of in the same family. And I really wish that I had the family tree. If you look at crude oil, and if you look up the family tree of crude oil and what it produces, it works like distillation. So let's say that you've got your mash of something. You got some maple syrup or something, and you're going to make some high-end Canadian whiskey. You got your stuff, and depending on what level you are evaporating stuff off, you will get different chemicals out of it. So right at the top, you're going to get your poisons, your ethanol, your wood alcohol, stuff like that. Just below that, you're going to get your alcohols. Below that, you're going to get some solvents and some other things like that. So this happens no matter what you're fermenting.
Sure.
But when you're fermenting crude oil, what happens is you wind up getting different fuels at different levels. So you will get, I want to say your xylenes and really high VOC, lightweight type stuff. And then you start getting kerosene, gasoline, diesel, solvents, naphtha, all those kind of things. And I might have some of those orders wrong, but you get the idea. Long chain hydrocarbon type fuel sources and stuff like that. And that kind of brings up a good point though too, because I mean, if you're looking at it, I mean, on the world scale, there's a potential that in the next few years we could move toward a crude oil dollar,
Right.
because of the value of oil. And if that happens, then that's going to change the dynamic of fuel and, you know, who's willing to pay for what, who's going to get what. And it's been an ongoing thing since the 70s. I mean, but anyways, I guess what I'm getting at is that as the currency of fuel changes, we have to change and adapt with it. And you're not going to get help from the government. So, I mean, not like you used to.
Right. And then Clark said, I have a kerosene diesel heater. Is there a way to make the homemade fuels that you can run on the heater?
Yeah. Diesel. You can run diesel. You can make your own diesel. Now, Clark, was it Clark?
Yeah.
Clark. So I'm not entirely familiar with the laws in Canada, but if there are laws against making your own fuels for locomotion for vehicles, that might be one thing. But if you are making your own fuels for home heating, that might be an alternative that you can use to bypass that. And there are ways. Maybe I'll drop this in real quick.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
The diesel, where is it? I gotta find this one. Give me just 1 second.
Yeah,
Here we
problem.
go. So Clark's gonna appreciate this, I think, because it sounds like he's into this kind of stuff. I'm dropping a link into the chat. This is for the folks who are listening who can't quite see the links. This link is UtahBiodieselSupply.com. This guy has tutorials, he has literature, he has diagrams, he has everything that you would need to know to make your own diesel. And like I mentioned, if you are going to go through the process of making diesel, if you want kerosene, the only difference is you'd have to distill it at the right level.
Right.
So that's the only thing that would be different. And I can tell you right now, some of the major universities are looking at alternatives for diesel fuel. Anybody who has a diesel tank knows that algae is a problem. Algae actually will grow in diesel, which is really weird.
It is weird.
But they're actually finding ways to turn that algae back into diesel. So they're turning algae or looking at the potential of using algae blooms as a source for making biodiesel.
Huh.
So and a lot of the research out there right now indicates that not only is it possible and feasible, but this is something that could very easily throw a wrench in the concept. Did you lose me?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I'm just enjoying this. This is fun.
Yeah, could throw a wrench in the concept of the petrol dollar.
Sure.
Because if you can create a regenerative fuel source from algae, all of a sudden your dependence on foreign oil changes, and you can be less reliant if you can harvest that potential. And you could even take algae blooms in swamps, or I don't know, wherever you can create them artificially and press them into oil, take the oil, add methanol, do your titrations, and next thing you know, you have diesel. What's neat about
go ahead.
I was just going to say what's neat about this Utah Biodiesel Supply, basically, and if you look up make your own diesel, there's all kinds of ways that you can do it, basically with a couple of water tanks. So if you have an old hot water tank that you pulled out of somebody's house, set it aside, because they reach just the right temperature, and it's a sealed contained unit to where you can basically boil off the diesel and run it into a 2 or 3 stage chain.
That is cool.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I like I said, all of the above when I first came off the show, is that, look, You can make your own gasifier using a couple of basic things. You can make your own diesel fuel using a couple of basic things. You can use your own propane using a couple of the right components. And these things are out there, and if you kind of bend your mind a little bit to receive some of these things, you'll actually see a lot of opportunity in alternative fuels.
Well, if nothing else, I mean, we're dealing with inflation wherever you want to go. I mean, maybe it's slowing down, it doesn't matter, but in my entire life, I've rarely seen anything go down in price. So anytime that you can create it yourself, I was kind of thinking, when you're talking about capturing algae bloom and you're talking about the oil dollar, it almost sounds like modern day alchemy, because if
you're chasing
at
gold.
one point, if at one point we had a gold backed dollar and we woke up tomorrow and people learned how to make lab grown gold like they did diamonds, well, that would have screwed everything. It would have dropped the price out. But I'm thinking, man, if you could do that with homemade fuels, absolutely.
Wow.
I'm just gonna this comment come from over on Telegram, and I can't link the comments here for that, so let's bring it up. It's what is the viability? This is from Mechanical Otter over on Telegram, and said, what's the viability of using turpentine, as fuel? My understanding is you can harvest it from pine trees and other conifers. Just wondering if it's practical. If you know, I don't know that one at all. So
I think you could probably do it. Turpentine's it's a little bit different. You might not get the same octane as you would with gasoline, and it would probably run really dirty, because you're talking your gasoline that you get now, it's usually E85 or whatever. I don't know what you guys get up there in Canada,
it's about the same.
They put in other additives to keep it clean so that the vehicles can run cleaner and stuff like this. Any of the stuff that I've mentioned, it's dirty. I mean, you're going to run into problems running it on your equipment. So I wouldn't go putting it into any, classic cars or anything like this. I mean, you're going to want something that's going to be able to handle some abuse, or something that's maybe on its way out. You want to get a couple more miles out of it, but you want to test this kind of stuff. Turpentine would probably work, but I have a feeling you probably have a lot more tar. And pine tar and stuff like that is just or you'd have to have a way to clean it,
And the thing is, I mean, if this isn't a shit hits the fan situation, then maybe it's all you have. But if you have better options, it might be fun to experiment, but not necessarily,
Well, and I think, the better options, turpentine would probably be great. The thing is you would probably need to do something to clean it, because the cleaner it is before it hits that combustion chamber, the better. And so you might want to go through a process of getting that turpentine or turpentine, I don't know, depending on how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
You would want to be able to make sure that it was as clean as possible. And usually you can tell by the way it burns.
One Step Closer says, I'm wondering what the fuel will do to gaskets. I thought this question would kind of tie into the dirtiness we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think for some of your gaskets, I mean, especially if you're talking like head gaskets and valve cover gaskets, things of that nature, especially in turpentine, that would probably eat away at some of the stuff that you're dealing with. So if you're using a lot, and you got to realize that. So biodiesel, for example, I ran 100% biodiesel in my 6.5 diesel. I've got a GMC K2500 pickup with the 6.5 Detroit in it, and it's fine. And surprisingly, it works really well. But and it's a 93. So back in the early 90s, they didn't have, they had sulfur in diesel to keep it clean, to keep the knockdown, to add power. But then they started doing away with that sulfur. You could get some additives a little bit afterward, but now you can't even hardly get that kind of stuff. And if you think about it, the solvents of bio.
Oh, they're just first time tonight. What? Yeah,
Sorry.
what was it? Solvents or something?
Yeah. So biodiesel has it's a very strong solvent.
Okay.
So the rubbers from the 90s were not capable of handling that kind of solvent, and basically that it would eat through all of my fuel lines. It would eat through my some of my gaskets, and things of that nature. The gasket material, right? If you're using a strong solvent, guess what? It's going to eat away any of those petroleum-based materials. So you would probably need to look into fuel lines or gaskets that are capable of withstanding biodiesel ratings. And you would probably, if you did that with turpentine in mind, then you would probably be okay.
I'm also thinking the modern engines with all of their environmental protections and refilters, they're not going to handle any of this, right?
Nope.
You're hooped. So, an
That's
EMP-proof vehicle would be a really nice one to have.
Well, and that's why I have these two trucks. I mean, one of them is the little dinky one that I can run around on the homestead, basically, and my other one is I'm working on rebuilding it right now, but that's the workhorse. I mean, I need something that I can go get wood, that I can pull people out of the ditch with, that I can, just go if I need to go, if I need to load a bunch of stuff in, because my wife's got a brand new car. I mean, it's like a 2020 Tundra or something like this. It's a beautiful vehicle. Don't get me wrong. It works great. But if something really were to go wrong, if there was an EMP strike or if there was some sort of catastrophic failure, maybe 5G steps in, who knows? Maybe they just decide to shut down vehicles. Or if they decide to ration fuels and all of a sudden, if your name doesn't start with A through P, you don't get diesel that day or that week or gasoline or whatever, then I have this two alternatives actually. One that I can run diesel, potentially biodiesel, and then another where I can run propane if propane's my only alternative. But neither of them are dependent on gasoline.
Which is good, because then even though, say, propane, for instance, is dependent on getting some, if you get some ahead of time, you've got three options. Always, 2 is 1 is none, and 3 is a guarantee, right? So if you can go 3 different ways, you got a hell of a lot better chance than your average Joe out there who probably runs a quarter tank of gas in their vehicle most of the time, right? So,
yep.
What about pressurizing the vapor storage tank?
No, you do not. And this is kind of I learned this one the hard way, not really the hard way, but I kind of realized the importance of this. So propane is a good example of this. Propane coming out of a propane tank usually is about 40 CFM. And a carburetor running propane only needs about 1 or 2 CFM.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And all you need is just enough to get it kind of into the chamber. And then once it's in there, the engine will actually draw it in from the natural rotation and combustion process. So you don't need a lot of pressure, which is why these ones were working like that picture. It's just a balloon, basically. And if you just have enough to get it in there, 1 to 2 PSI is all you need to get it to move. A lot of the old vehicles, if you look up photos of old vehicles running gasifiers, they were either direct pumping the gas into the vehicle, or they were running basically a balloon, and they would fill up these balloons at a filling station where they were generating gas, and then they would just have them on top of the vehicle or on the side or in a tank or whatever, but it does not need to be pressurized.
And this is my brother-in-law, Barrett. He's a mechanic. So I think he's implying once you get started, you've got a vacuum created and it's going to suck. Yeah, it's going to suck itself through. So,
yep.
Oh boy. Yep. So one more here, and then we'll go on to diesel. But 30-day, this is Justin. He just said, if you're going to do modifications or run this kind of stuff, he said it might be a good idea to have I might not recommend it in a worst case scenario, but I would say day to day, it's not bad to have a sticker to let emergency personnel know what kind of fuel you've got in there.
Yeah. Well, and what you could do, like one of the reasons I haven't gone down the highway yet on my propane one, because I'm still field testing it around the house. But what I'll do, for example, is I'll put the placard on. So I want it to be concealed. So I'm going to put the propane tank inside of a box, basically like a toolbox, and then have that placarded on the box itself. So if there was an emergency responder who came across the vehicle or something, if they saw that placard, they would know. But if there was somebody that's just walking by, maybe 1 out of 100 people would know what that placard meant.
Right.
So
OPSEC.
Yep, exactly. So
do you want to slide into a little more about making diesel? How far have you gone down that rabbit hole yet?
So that one has actually been more, how do I say this? My truck has been down for almost a year now, which is unfortunate, but it's kind of like a comedy of errors, and I'm finally getting back to the point where I can rebuild it. It's been kind of fortunate because diesel is almost $6-7 a gallon. So it's actually cheaper for me to run gasoline or propane right now than it is to run diesel. So it hasn't been on the forefront. If I was still driving that, then I would definitely be doing it. But how do I say this? I have contacts with people who are making their own biodiesel from a research standpoint. So they're making pure biodiesel and they're trying different kinds. So like they've got vials of hemp biodiesel, coconut biodiesel, pine tree biodiesel, pretty much all kinds of different stuff. And that's where I was able to test my vehicle and get 100% biodiesel from them. But since it was in a research type of thing, it was a little bit different, and I don't want to give away too much of that process, but so for me to see that from a research standpoint is a little bit different because they're doing it in big vats, massive containers. And I want it to be scaled down. I want 2 or 3 hot water tanks. And so I'm kind of collecting the supplies for that type of stuff, to be able to have a 2 or 3 stage system. It's also really difficult. That's one thing to keep in mind. It's really difficult to get, for me, I'm a cheap bastard. So, if I can't get it cheap or free, then I'm not going to spend money on it, especially if it's a personal project. I'll just let it kind of happen naturally. So, a couple of the things that I want to be able to do is filter the oil from oil changes, because you can actually, and this is a dirty trick, if you guys are running dyed diesel, just throw a little bit of dirty oil in and you won't be able to tell the difference. And you can just say, oh yeah, I'm just running my own, I put dirty oil in my fuel tank, because that's what's one of the neat things about diesel is some of the first diesel engines ran on straight peanut oil. It wasn't even diesel fuel. It was just straight oil. And really you could probably even burn antifreeze in it if you had to.
I saw a guy recently, he was a TikToker, and he would go around to garages and collect their used motor oil because because they have to pay to get rid of it a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and he had it was like an early 80s diesel vehicle, and he filtered it, and I think it was like was he adding 5% diesel to it? I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't much. It was basically running on 95% motor oil. And I thought, and it was impressive.
Oh yeah. And that's just it. People don't realize that you don't necessarily need diesel to run a diesel truck. You can run it on straight oil. The dirtier it is, the more you're going to have, like, especially if you have optical sensors on your fuel lines or anything like that, you could run into problems. But those older ones didn't. They just run straight. Well, as long as you don't have an optical sensor on your diesel fuel line, then you're not going to run into problems on that side of things. But I don't know if I kind of answered that question or not.
Yeah, no.
So some of the things. Oh, that's what I was going to say is equipment. So hot water tanks. I need to get my hands on a couple of hot water tanks. A centrifuge is another thing that I'm considering, because how the guy was just putting dirty diesel in, or dirty oil. Now, diesel oil is extremely dirty. I mean, it's black after 10 seconds of running a vehicle.
Okay.
But used motor oil from a car, if it's caramely, that's usually not too bad. one thing that people will run around here, and it's kind of a commodity, like it's almost like a drug trade, is used oil from fryers, from Chinese restaurants, stuff like that. And those types of things, there's like this weird territorial type of thing where
Yes.
once you have that contract, you don't want anybody near it. That's your source. And I know that the guy who's running around town with the IBC tote filling it with dirty oil is making his own diesel.
Well, I don't know if I ever told you this, but my first job after I graduated university was working at a Dairy Queen. And there was a local guy named Chris. He had a winery. He was, kind of on the granola side of things, which whatever, doesn't matter. Yeah. And he would come in about once a month, and he would drop off 55-gallon drums that we would dump our old fry oil into. He would take it, leave us an empty one, and we never had to pay to dispose of it. And he was filtering it and running his van off it.
Yep. And that's just it. I mean, you can run waste oil heaters in your shops. You can run oil in your oil furnaces, stuff like that. The cleaner it is, the better. And that's kind of where people are like, "Ooh, this is dirty. I don't want it." And if you get in good with those shops, you get in good with those restaurants, if you get in good with any kind of waste oil from like hydraulics or anything like that, hydraulic shops, things of that nature, you can probably try and get your hands on some of that kind of stuff with the intention of doing that. You're going to have different results with each one. And that's, if you're interested in doing that, you really need to look into the requirements for filtration, requirements for titration, which is like how you get the suds and stuff out and make diesel out of that oil. And if you're going to be doing it, the other component here is methanol. So if you want diesel, you take oil and you add methanol and you get diesel fuel. That's a very basic equation. It's a little bit more complex when you go through the process, but essentially it's like I want to say it's like a 10-to-1 ratio. You don't need very much oil. You need a lot of methanol. Oh, okay. And if you can get methanol by the drum, then you can get a 55-gallon drum of methanol, and you might pay $500 for it. But that 55 gallons could translate into, 200-300 gallons or whatever it is. Just depends on how you mix it up and how that works. So anyways.
RZ says he knows somebody that runs a Benz off fry oil and it smells really good.
Oh yeah.
So you said two tanks and a centrifuge. What else? Was there anything else?
Just maybe some minor controls and the oil source. Methanol is the other part. And you can make methanol with just wood. So
go ahead.
That's it's basically just wood alcohol. So you take wood alcohol and you mix it with oil and you get diesel.
So if everything kind of fell apart tomorrow, mm-hmm. and you had to come up with your own fuel source, what one would you kind of lean toward, do you think?
So this is going to be kind of weird, but I think I would probably lean toward the gasifier.
Sure.
But and part of that is because wood is readily available for me. I mean, I can get it. I can chip it up. I can make it work. And I've got a gas powered chipper that I could plug my gasifier into and keep it running. And use that wood chipper and be able to get what I need. But I think that as people and citizens, we've been kept in the dark when it comes to energy and fuel sources. And I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Nikola Tesla.
A little bit.
But he's, I got really into him, and I was really kind of curious about how to, what this guy had going on. And for folks who aren't familiar with Nikola Tesla, he developed what was called a Tesla coil and had some really outlandish ideas of how electricity worked, and how things communicated, not just at face value, but up into outer space, back to the earth. And he was kind of a genius of sorts who really got set apart. Like he really was kind of called out as a nut job, and for the time that he was in through World War I and World War II, I think a lot of his genius and his ideas went by the wayside, or they wound up getting stolen by other people.
Sure.
But there's a lot of credibility to some of his concepts, and I've read a couple of his books, or books about him, and there was one thing that always struck me as kind of odd. Was it was kind of like one of the last things that he said was that we're kind of stuck in what we're capable of doing until we really harness the power of nitrogen.
Really?
And I was that stuck in my craw for a while, because I was like, why the hell is this guy who is so forward thinking when it comes to electricity? And mind you, electricity was like the internet, or I don't know, harnessing electricity the way that he was harnessing electricity is so far above and beyond what we have come to be used to when it comes to electricity. Like, he had concepts for wireless devices, wireless technology, wireless communications, all this kind of stuff in the turn of the 1900s, early 1920s. And because of the weight of Edison and his inventions and this race for invention, he kind of got sidelined. Now we're starting to see, what he was doing, or what he was kind of trying to get at, now that we are using similar technology. But all these technologies have been developed by, massive companies or conglomerates or things like that. And people haven't really latched on to that concept of nitrogen. And I started looking into it. And most people don't know this, but Nikola Tesla actually had a patent, one of the first patents for making an ozone generator.
Okay.
Ozone is O3. So it's basically 3 oxygen molecules in a triangle. It's not unstable, but they will readily release an oxygen molecule in the right environment. So anything in the presence of oxygen generally tends to burn better, right? And nitrogen in particular will burn in the presence of oxygen. The nitrogen is an inert gas, so it doesn't burn by itself. Like, the environment is 70 or 80% nitrogen. Like, that's just the air that we breathe. Almost all of it's nitrogen. It's not oxygen. If you're breathing more than 20% oxygen, you're in an oxygen rich environment. That's an explosive environment. If you're in an environment that's 19.5 or less, that's an oxygen deficient environment. So there's that sweet zone, 20.5 and 19.5. That's like 1%. That's where life is. But that other 80% is almost all nitrogen. So when you have this genius who's talking about, the potential of wireless communication, death rays, and, all kinds of crazy stuff that he was into, and he makes this comment about nitrogen. And I honestly think that if you were to take, and this is one of the things that I'm working on. So if in an answer to your question, long answer to a short question, if you were to take and say, okay, world's over now, you figure it out. Essentially what I would attempt to do is run a gasifier, and instead of pumping ambient air into it, I would pump ozone into it along with liquid nitrogen, and basically have a nitrogen generator to where I could have my own nitrogen container, and then run oxygen and nitrogen together. And what that would do is accelerate that burn and get cleaner fuel on the other end, I think. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. And I'm kind of hoping to be able to do that, because if you could have a chamber that does nothing but hold that, how do I say, hold that explosive environment until you're ready for it, then you wouldn't necessarily need much else. I mean, you wouldn't need a fuel source because your fuel source is in the air. So, and there's actually a story that he was able to run a vehicle off of nothing but a couple of bulbs and a few gadgets that he got from a hardware store. And I'm almost wondering that if he was able to, and he didn't tell anybody how he did it. The guy who he was with was like a witness testimony kind of thing, but there was no way for anybody to go back and say, how did you do this? Or where's your diagram? Show me what this, I think that's probably what happened, is he was able to draw in nitrogen, pump ozone into a combustion chamber and use that as the explosive fuel and just basically pump air into it.
Man, if you could do that.
Yeah.
If nothing else, you'd have an incredible YouTube channel to start with, but
well, I wouldn't be alive for very long. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Clark wants to know, and I don't know the answer to this, but is there a way to camouflage dyed gasoline?
Dyed gasoline?
Or yeah, he says gasoline. I'm wondering because we have both up here, dyed gasoline and dyed diesel, because you can farm vehicles could run off both, so they have tax free or whatever. But
yep. So I know with dyed diesel, one of the tricks that I've heard of would be to put, like I said,
still there. Oh, did we lose you? Oh, I lost him right quick. I was just yeah. Oh no. Everything's been going perfect all of a sudden. Yeah, Clark says, oh, there you go. You're good.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good, man. No worries.
So yeah, if you, one of the things that we do or that can be done, we don't do this, right?
Right. No. This is for
hypothetical. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
If you were to take dyed diesel, you could potentially put used oil in it, especially a black, diesel oil, and just say that you put a little bit in there for lubricity. Right? Because you want your diesel to have that lubrication. You just add it in the fuel, you're good to go, right? Which no problem against that. They stick the dipstick in there and it comes out black. But with dyed gasoline, I don't know. Never really had a chance.
So,
transmission fluid?
This feller would know. I'm thinking. So it's good to have my brother-in-law along here. So
yeah, there you go.
I'm going to guess that add a little bit of that. And yeah, I might have to do some tests for educational purposes only, just to see how well it works, because that would be that'd be fun just to know. And honestly, almost everything we do whenever we talk really is thought experiments, right? Because this is okay, well, what would I do if shit hit the fan, or if I needed to make, because all this is about making do when the normal shit isn't around, right? So what else did we have here?
There's one question about fuel storage.
Yeah, I got one more to add, and then we'll go into the fuel storage, because that could probably take us to the end. I'm thinking. But Clark wanted to know, can you talk a bit about using vegetable-based oils in a cold climate? I already know the answers, but I think it'd be very helpful for future listeners on the podcast.
Yeah. So I was running 100%. I believe it was canola oil, and I was running it in the summertime. Unfortunately, in the wintertime, you tend to have a lot more condensation. It's not quite as good. And it's, let's just say that I didn't run it in the wintertime. The folks that I was working with were actually coming up with a form of long chain diesel molecules that were capable of being run in cold weather climates, like sub-zero climates, because the feds want to be able to do whatever they're doing in Antarctica and wherever else, and they're running diesel, and their diesel is gelling up, and that's what happens with diesel fuel. It gels up, and with ultra cold environments, it's garbage. I've been in environments where I've driven down the road in a work truck with a couple of other guys, and it's 14 below outside, 60 miles an hour, and we're gelling up as we're going down the road.
Wow.
And it's a scary way to be, because once that truck stops, you're done. You're in that environment, and you're either going to have to wait for a truck to come and get you, or you're going to have to light a fire under it to try and get it warm. or something, because that fuel gels up in the fuel lines or wherever else, and you're screwed. So that's some of the challenges you do have to kind of keep in mind when it comes to diesel fuel, is the potential for gelling.
I mean, I've left bottles of canola oil, olive oil in my vehicle overnight, and even in kind of that minus 10 to 15 Celsius, it gets so thick that you couldn't pour it if you wanted to. Even actually, I have my prepper pantry 2 doors down here in the basement, and if it's I've pulled down bottles of olive oil that have been against the concrete wall, and so they didn't freeze, but they're damn near refrigerated, and it looked like, yeah, I don't know what you would call it,
crystallizes,
but yeah,
like honey.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clark says a fire under truck's a good plan.
Yeah, my old boss spent some time in the military in Alaska, I want to say, and one of the things that they had to do was ignite fires under the trucks. They had to light fires under them so that they could get them warm enough to just to start.
It's a common thing. I mean, not that in the oil patch, some of our rigs, they're kind of old diesel engines. They would just leave when it got really cold. We would just leave them run for 2-3 weeks at a time.
Yep.
And
don't shut them off.
Circulating. Yeah, because if you did, you were hooped. And they didn't like it. But those diesels can idle on a teaspoon of fuel anyway. But yeah, it was. I mean, because if not, you just minus 40. You're not getting it started, no matter what you got going on with it.
Yeah.
So do you want to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes talking about fuel storage?
Yeah, this is a little bit tough for me because I look at fuel storage as a very short-term kind of thing. Unless you have stabilizers in fuel, it doesn't make sense to try and store it. And I try to cycle fuel through equipment as much as possible. So I get it when I can. But I don't spend a whole lot of time storing it. If you want long-term fuel storage, the best thing to do is pony up and get the fuel that's already in a container. A sealed container that has usually like a gasoline or something like that is probably the best. And at least that way you can have an idea of how much time you have before you need to use that. They're usually pressure sealed, and if you keep them in a decent climate and decent environment, you're okay. But what I do personally for fuel storage is I'll cycle through it and siphon it out of my vehicles as I need it. So how do I say this? I store it in my vehicles, which is kind of weird. Like if you're using a daily driver, yeah, you're going to be running that. And you're going to be cycling through that fuel normally. But I also have a four-wheeler. I've got a couple of riding lawnmowers. I've got a boat. I've got, other pieces of little equipment here and there. Plus I have gas cans. So, I try to make sure that any of the fuel.
Oh, lost you one more time. We've been doing so good tonight, Tim. Oh, there you
sorry.
Go. No, you're good now.
Any of the fuel that I use for my boat in the summertime, or didn't use, I'm sorry, that winds up getting siphoned and it goes into my other vehicles. And so but I can store it in there for a portion of time, but I'm not going to run dirty fuel in my boat. What'll happen is I'll, pull it out and I'll use it in my mowers. I'll use it in my four-wheeler. I'll fill up my gas cans, maybe use it in my truck or something. And I kind of cycle through it as much as I can in that regard, but I don't like the idea of storing fuel. So
I'm a little on the opposite, not far, but a few thoughts on my end. First off, propane is great, like we talked about for fuel storage. So a few years ago, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, I upgraded from 20-pound tanks or 5-gallon tanks to 30-pound tanks because they weren't that much more at Costco, and all of my 20-pounders were starting to expire. So, and the other thing is, for the most part, if you can fit, because they a 20-pounder and a 30-pounder have the same footprint, so they're not taking up any more square footage. So I always stored them under my workbench. I had the extra height, so I just moved over to 30-pounders. So now I have 6 30-pounders that are all well within expiration date. So number one, that's good because having multiple options. Now I use the Jack Spirko fuel method. But I have 12 5-gallon cans of gas. Well, actually, let me back up a little first. First thing I do is I also store it in my vehicles. So because, don't ever let your vehicle get below half a tank, because right there, if you do, then you've automatically cut down on how far you could travel in a worst case scenario, right? So for me, I'm always thinking two things: how long can I run my generator, or how far can I drive away if I need to? And I have a plan and how much. Anyway, so I have 12 5-gallon cans of gas on a shelf, and they're numbered 1 through 12. And every one of them is, I use PRI-G stabilizer. It's the only stabilizer on the market that you can restabilize the fuel indefinitely. And so it'll never go bad as long as you retreat it once a year, which is awesome. So anyway, so the fuel is never more than 12 months old, because what I do is when January comes along, I take can number 1, dump it into my truck, and then I go and refill can number 1. And once a month I do that. And so I never have more than 12 months old of fuel. And it's a good way. Now, not everybody is comfortable storing 60 gallons of gasoline in 5-gallon jugs. I get it. I'm cool with it. I've never had any issues with it. So yeah, I kind of look at it in liters. If I have 20 times 12 is 240 liters. I have 80 liters in my vehicle. That's about 320 liters of fuel, which will allow me to drive around 3,000 kilometers, which is 2,000 miles. Just so happens that land we bought in Tennessee is about 3,000 kilometers away. So,
nice.
Not that, anyway, that's kind of where I come from. So.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I do have a bunch of gas cans. I think everybody's situation is going to depend on your behavior. I mean,
yes.
if you're not meticulous about the importance and understand how important it is to stabilize fuel, you will waste money and you will destroy equipment. And I think the majority of people, I wouldn't advise doing it, because you don't understand how much damage it can cause, and you will destroy a vehicle in a grid down scenario if you put more fuel in it. I mean, you're done. You may as well throw it in a lawnmower, or something that's not going to be, something that's going to carry your weight and your family. Okay. So I'm totally on board with that. I've got gas cans too, and I think that's a great concept. But for most people, the idea of storing fuel is something that you have to be diligent with. And the 12-month process or 12, that's genius, because then that way that every month you got 5 gallons that you need to change out, dump it in the gas tank, and move on, right? That it makes perfect sense to do it that way. The propane fuel storage, I'm leaning toward that more and more every day, and having not only a large propane fuel storage tank, but having a propane tank that I can tap off of. Yes. So that I can run my own tanks and run my own vehicles off of it.
Underground or above ground, do you think?
I would probably do underground if I had the choice, because I don't want it to be as obvious. I'd much rather, in fact, I have a car, put it underneath of that, and then pump it up, and then just be super discreet, pop off a couple of gallons when I needed it.
So what's it? Do you know what's involved in getting propane out of an underground tank into because of course in a tank, you're going to have your what is it? Your
manifold,
your gas on top, and then your liquids below, right? Mm-hmm. So have you looked into that at all?
No, I haven't, because just the tank installation is probably about $5,000 to $7,000.
Yeah.
And then the tank full is another 5 to 7. So, you could put a liquid pump on it. I'm sure that because they have above ground tanks all over the place. And actually, that's one thing that, who was it that mentioned that about storage?
Which one was it about?
Someone, who was it that was asking about the storage side of things?
Oh, I lost it now. I had it starred.
Clark.
Just Clark, was it? I think it was. We talk about fuel store. I can't even search the question. There we go. Yeah, Haas. It was Haas.
Haas. Okay. So this might be a little bit evil of me, but my idea of storing fuel is knowing where it's at. So I can go around and drive around in my community, and I know about within a 3-mile radius where I can find 6 to 8 different 2,000-pound propane tanks. So, you know,
I get it.
You know what I mean? If you know what you're doing, or if you know how to work with people, then getting your hands on fuel, let them store it for you, I guess is what I'm getting at.
It's no different than the last time we had a big power outage. I drove around to see which buildings still had power, and it turned out that our local IT, or, the place that brings our internet into town still has power. So I had the only Wi-Fi in town. So, when that kind of stuff is great to know.
Oh yeah. So I kind of have a map in my mind of where I could resource that kind of stuff. Anyway.
So I'm also, and now it's not storage per se, but I'm a big fan of tapping. So we have natural gas here, and I love natural gas. Now, not everybody has natural gas, and I always get the ones, well, what are you going to do when the government shuts the natural gas off? And I get it. Hey, I've played those games, and anybody who says that to me doesn't realize that I also have propane and gasoline stored on hand. But I think you're absolutely doing yourself a disservice if you don't figure out a way to tap into your natural gas for other things.
Mm-hmm.
I have my generator hooked up. So I taught myself all of this stuff. I learned how to put a barbecue outlet into my natural gas. It's much safer. If you know how to plumb and you know how to test fittings, it's not difficult. You just need to do it. So I put in a barbecue outlet on the outside of my house, which is great. 99% of the time, my barbecue runs off it. But when the power goes out, I have a 25-foot quick connect hose that goes into there and into my generator, and now I can run. Guess what? In 9 years here, we've probably had a dozen power outages. We haven't had a single natural gas outage. So to me, that's a way to quote unquote store fuel that doesn't really count. Now, if shit hits the fan and it's turned off, okay, well then I tap some of my other resources. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so how do I say this? I agree. Natural gas is probably one of the best alternatives, especially in the event of a power outage, because I used to have a house that had natural gas as well. And when the power went out, I would lose heat controls, but I would still have hot water. Right. And I would still have, because that was all based on water pressure. And then I would also have my stove. My stove would still work. So I could cook and I had water. I could still get by. Even if I didn't have power, whatever, I could still at least make that work. So there's a lot to be said about natural gas and that alone as a backup to a potential power outage. Because I think the infrastructure, the way it is, power outages are more of a problem than natural gas outages. 100%.
Yes.
But I mentioned to a friend of mine, probably close to a year ago by now, some of my concerns with regard to natural gas. And the reason is because there has been a major shortage in helium. And you wouldn't think, well, why is that a big deal? Why, helium's not that big of a deal. We can do, I don't get my balloon from the craft store or whatever, but the thing is helium is used in a lot of research, especially nuclear. It's called NMR research. They use nuclear magnetic technology, basically. I think that's what it's called. It's non-renewable.
Right, which I didn't know for a long time. And
the thing is it runs in line with natural gas. It's a byproduct of helium is a byproduct of natural gas, and those veins typically run in tandem. So where you find helium, you find natural gas.
Okay.
So when I started hearing rumblings that researchers were unable to get their hands on helium and they were paying outrageous prices for it, And then we start seeing stuff like natural gas pipeline explosions underwater in where is it, off the coast of the United Kingdom?
Yes. Yep.
You know, and then we're starting to see this pushback in the United States where they're thinking about banning future sales of natural gas. And it's like,
I don't understand that. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
Well, that's kind of where I don't understand it either. But there are too many coincidences here that are adding up to a potential shortfall when it comes to natural gas, and it's something that's got me a little bit concerned because I love natural gas like you. I mean, I think it's a great alternative.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, though. You know, yeah. I think I love it. Use it until it's not there. But if something happens, then yeah, make sure you have other plans.
Yeah, and I think there's something going on with natural gas. I haven't quite figured it out, but I think within the next 12 to 24 months, there's something's going to come to a head when it comes to natural gas. And guess who's the number one supplier of natural gas?
Well, it's Russia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we have tons up here. So
yeah. Yeah. You guys also have tons of oil.
Yeah, I know. But we can trade. I don't mind. So Know Your Joe says, what about the different size and gas orifices for natural gas and propane? Can you use one size for both? No. But typically almost anything that'll run on propane or natural gas can be converted. But this is something you want to do. Now, you can maybe speak a little bit to the off-grid end of it, but any conversion I've done, I've always made sure I've got the conversion kit for them ahead of time, just to make sure you have them. And then also, if you convert something, make sure you remember where you put that conversion kit or the pieces you removed, because I had to deconvert. So I converted from natural gas to propane, my furnace in my garage. I set it all in a nice bag, put it away. I knew right where it was. And then a year later, I switched back to natural gas and I knew where it was. So, make sure of that too.
Yeah. And, we threw a big party this summer. I might have lost you.
No, you're good.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. No,
we threw a big party this summer and we wound up getting one of those propane fire tables and a couple of those propane lamp heaters.
Yep.
And I realized that, kind of we were talking about storing fuel in vehicles. If you're smart about it, you can also store propane in, everyday locations, like grab a couple of those propane heater lamp stands, grab if you have a barbecue, you could fit usually 2 propane tanks underneath of them, especially, and if you get the kind with the doors, at least they're concealed. A fire table is a good example. Even if it's hooked up to natural gas, you still have a storage cavity in there that you can use for storing propane. And you don't necessarily even have to use these pieces of equipment, but just having them on hand and having a place to put those, you can have 30, 40 gallons of propane sitting there with your normal patio furniture.
I'm a big fan of urban camouflage. I love that. Hide things in the open that people never, because everybody wants the simplest or the easiest path, right? So the least resistance, that's what I'm looking for. So if they don't, they're not going to come in and have to open something up and unhook a propane tank, but you know what they are going to take? That full propane tank that you accidentally left outside your back fence in the back alley when some crackhead drives by, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So we've been an hour and a half.
Oh, it goes quick.
We only scratched the surface. I want to ask you a couple quick what other alternative fuels didn't we talk about tonight? Was there anything that
so we got gasifiers, we got diesel, we got wood, gas. What was the other one that we had? Propane. I wanted to just give this guy a shout out. So gotpropane.com is where I got my propane conversion kit. Okay. This one I had to make some modifications to, and I'll probably see if I can't post a video or an article or something like that about it once I've successfully ran it a little bit. But he's out of Arizona, I believe, and super nice guy, great to work with, and I'd be happy to send him business, tell him I sent you or whatever. I don't get any kickbacks or anything, but he's he's a legit businessman and just a small, I mean, that's all he does. You know, he just sells these kits. It's not like, you know, Flowmaster or Holly or something like that, where there's a giant conglomeration. There's a couple of unique individuals that use these kind of things for rock crawling kits, or, you know, mutter trucks or whatever. And I think, oh, there was one thing that I wanted to drop in, because this is something that has gone by the wayside, and it's really kind of saddens me, is Steam.
Right. Yeah, we never even. Yeah.
And this is, we could go on about this. And actually, the evolution of Steam is something that I think people have gotten rid of all of their Steam radiant heaters and Steam powered devices. And the thing is if we were able to run on Steam powered communities,
Yep.
You could have micro turbines in houses now that could basically run power off of the steam as it's being, how do you say, so steam has to go through a cycle, and when it goes back before it hits the boiler point, there's a point there where you can capture energy, and in some instances there's so much energy captured there that you could run a small turbine. That turbine might be enough to, you know, power something more than a solar powered array on your house. Just a very small turbine that you could put in next to your boiler in your house. And in the event that you had enough steam energy to heat your home and run electricity, you would be able to reduce your needs somewhat of power. And if you had a coal fired steam boiler or a wood fired steam boiler, then you could run off wood, have electricity and heat. Plus you could have steam for other things like cleaning and stuff like that. I shared a video with you. This guy's got 20 million views on YouTube. It's 4 minutes of your life, but you got to watch it. It's called I Made My Own Vehicle. And it's some guy out of Mexico. It's all in Spanish, but there are subtitles. Basically what he did is he took leftover parts from a motorcycle, Volkswagen Beetle, cylinders and pistons, and some tube framing, a 55-gallon drum, and what looks like an air, like a 30-gallon air compressor tank. And he built essentially a steam engine. And the way it works is he puts a little bit of water in it.
Sorry, I was trying to bring up the video for you, but it all of a sudden started making noise. And sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so essentially he puts a couple ounces of water in, and water, when it comes to steam, and when it turns into steam, it expands like 50 or 60 times its mass. So you have all this pressure buildup as you boil that water and generate steam. If you have a place for that steam to blow off, you have potential for locomotion. It's basically a train, like a steam locomotive that this guy built on the back of his bike. He's able to run basically just ride around on his bike without pedaling on a couple of sticks of wood and a little bit of paper and a little bit of water, and that's it. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said about what can be done with steam, especially nowadays with the technology that we have when it comes to pistons and compression and doing it right. If some dude from Mexico can slam one together with shoddy welding and be able to drive down the road with about 4 ounces of water and, you know, a barbecue on the back of his bike, why aren't we looking at different ways to do this kind of stuff, you know, otherwise? Just blows me away.
We should. There's everybody was like, you know, who said it here? Where was it? Clark said I could listen for another few hours. So I know we've done this before, but I think we should. I think we should do a part 2 of this in a couple of months. If you're up for it.
I will. Yeah, I will see what I can do to update. You know, hopefully I can get some welding and cutting on this gasifier and kind of give you an update on how that's going for me.
Sure. Yeah. And I think we could talk about steam, and we could talk when you were talking about steam, I was also thinking about water wheels and that sort of thing.
Yep.
So if you had, you know, and I also I've been really into mass batteries too. I've been interested in looking at like where you pump water up and hold it, and then you capture the energy from releasing it. And I know
sure.
I'm not doing it justice, but there's
It's
crazy.
There's a whole hydroelectric facility built on that principle. I don't know where it is.
Yes, that's right. Because they use the natural geography of the place, right? Because they pump it up into a stored tank up the hill. Yeah.
And they usually do that like at night, and then they'll pump it. They won't pump it down. They'll just let it flow down, and it runs through the turbines during the peak hours, and then they'll pump it up at night when it's quiet.
It's interesting. I think we should do another one if you're up for it. Give it a couple months, and we'll come back and do another, because it's always fun. Get to pick each other's brains a little bit, So So how do people find you, Ryan, so they can follow up and keep listening to you?
Yeah, so if you're interested in the Next Generation show, you can go on over to prepperbroadcasting.com. We are live every Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that's one avenue. If you just want to kind of hear me babble on with Colin and shoot the shit, you're welcome to join us. There's a live chat as well if you want to tune into that on Element. Details are on prepperbroadcasting.com. And then over there, you're going to find my show page too. If you want to get in touch with me, there's you can reach me on Twitter. I'm semi sort of active on that. I tried Instagram and Facebook, and I just can't. I'm not a photographic kind of guy. I'll do the talking and the walking, but when it comes to trying to take pictures and make myself look good, it just doesn't happen. Obviously, I mean, but no, it's I'm on Twitter at Dad Prepper, and then you can always email me if anybody's got questions or you want to find out more. If you want the links to anything that I've dropped in, it's just prepperdad@mail.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, man. This was fun. I'm sure I'll get to see you, if not before. Are you guys going to prepper camp again, you think, or?
We've been invited back. Sounds like I think I'm going to be doing my presentation again on freeze drying for survival.
There was such a demand for that. Oh my God. Yeah.
There's a lot of people that were really interested. So I'll probably do that. And if I do wind up nailing this gasifier thing, then I might see about having one up and running at prepper camp if I can get it dialed in.
That would be cool.
I'd really like to show people the power of this kind of stuff.
Do you know, I just thought of this completely off topic, but if you're flying down and I'm driving down, there might be some room for me to pick it up and take it down for you if that needed to happen. So
okay, yeah, we could probably see about doing something like that. I mean, especially if you're already planning to make a drive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm going to be down there for prepper camp and Self-Reliance Festival and Prepper Palooza. I've got 3 that I'm going to be at all in 3 weekends. So
wow. Okay.
And
God, I wish I could take that kind of time and do the same.
Self-employed, I've worked really hard at it.
Yeah.
And we're looking at doing our own festival up here too. So,
hey, well, if that happens, let me know. I'll get my stuff in order, and we'll head up. And
that would be awesome. We're going to call it the workshop, I think.
There you go. Very cool.
Cool. All right. If you can hang in the background for a split second, I'll shut things up and I'll be right back.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Cool.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Ryan's a person I consider a dear close friend at this point. We got to hang out for 3 days at prepper camp, and even long before that, we just seemed to hit it off, and I absolutely just enjoy his company. And there's very few people who sharpen my brain like he does and stretch me, so I always appreciate it. And I see that, Clark, as I'm closing up here, 5 hours to Provost from here. Yes, so the plan is Heritage Day weekend. I'm not exactly sure when that is, that fake made up government holiday. I think we're going to do it here. Within the month, I'm going to have a bunch more. I spent a whole bunch of time brainstorming today about it, and we'll go from there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I love these shows because I learn as much as I get to share. And it's fun to let Ryan do most of the talking once in a while because, I love the sound of my own voice, and that's not a good thing. So with that, guys, I hope you take care. This is Sunday night, so we'll see you Thursday. And we are going to do I'm going to do an episode on Thursday all about the Buffalo blizzard and what went wrong and maybe some lessons we can learn from it. So with that, guys, as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.